you here, and all the way from the Bahamas, which is amazing. And I love technology. And so I want to start out first with you just talking about you. I want you to share your story and who you are and how you've gotten to where you are and what you do now.
Yeah, sure. So like every good story, it began with a real deep feeling of discontent. I mean, that's all I remember as a kid, and feeling like I didn't fit in. And I thought it really related to the environment I was in. I was born in the UK, and I just had this feeling that I really wanted to travel. Um, but what I realise now is that feeling of discontent really came from a place of wanting to know truth.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And to find that truth, or to find the reflection of that truth in someone or something.
Yeah.
So what happened was before I was married, I spent some time in Italy, in Naples, Italy, teaching. And then I came back to the UK, fell madly in love with my husband in my early 20s. And then he and I were offered jobs teaching in the Bahamas. Our profession, my profession, we are both educators. He's an English teacher and I'm a fine art teacher.
Mm-hmm.
So we were given these fantastic jobs in the Bahamas, and we came here in 1980.
Wow.
And loved the fun of it. I mean, it was a great experience. We were trying new things. We were scuba diving. We bought a boat. There was a lot of partying. But, the thing I realized after a few months of those distractions, there was still this feeling of discontent.
Mm.
It didn't go.
Mm-hmm.
So I would, and I know you can relate to this, and I'm sure a lot of listeners relate to this.
Yeah.
So I remember vividly going to parties and hoping that I would meet someone that could reflect that something I was looking for back, or speak to that, what that was.
Yeah.
Even though I couldn't put into words what it was I was looking for. And invariably I'd come away from those parties just feeling really disappointed.
Mm.
And still feeling that I was looking. Anyway, I remember, I think it was around 1989, I picked up some snorkeling gear to go swimming, and I heard a voice, and the voice said, "You can't go on like this."
Mm.
And it was so clear and so loud. I looked around, there was no one there. And then at the same time,
I hate to interrupt, but at that point, did you know you had psychic abilities? Was this hearing that voice, was that something new to you, or?
That's a good question, actually. The thing is I've always had I call it intuitive, just a different word, but intuitive abilities. Because as a kid, I'd have out-of-body experiences.
Okay.
I'd have dream visitations from loved ones who'd passed over.
Okay.
I would know information about friends and family members that had never been articulated.
Yeah.
And I would feel that deep in, as if it was me. It was me. It was my own. I was reading myself, in other words.
Mm-hmm.
So that was not new. And the thing is that there was no one in my life that I could speak to about any of those phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
So that really reinforced the feeling of being weird.
Yeah, it does. I can relate to that. It's amazing how many of us had that experience, and yet there's so many of us. So if we would have only all talked to each other, we would have had a different support system than I think we did. So it's interesting.
Yeah. Well, you think the thing is, well, back in the 60s and 70s, when I was, a lot younger, there was, there weren't the resources that there are now.
Yeah, it's amazing. Even in a decade, just the YouTube videos of meditations alone, there's thousands and thousands of them, where 10 years ago I was trying to find a CD in a strange little store to learn how to meditate. It's really interesting how fast it's gotten mainstream.
Oh, sure. I mean, it's incredible now. Anywhere you go, you can find anything.
Mm-hmm.
But, back in those days, I didn't there was nowhere. I mean, and the thing as well is that I was the only one in my family that was interested, for some weird reason, in hatha yoga.
Oh, interesting.
So I used to do all these asanas, and I would, I did find a book,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd try and sort of practice my hatha yoga in this crazy household.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody thought I was a lunatic. But what I realized now was that really connected in to what happened in the next part of the story, which is, when I was in the Bahamas and I had this message.
Yeah.
A friend invited me to a meditation center.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought, great, I'm going to go, because I had always wanted to learn to meditate.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd never found anybody that could teach, and I just didn't know how to do it.
Yeah.
So anyway, I went along to the meditation center, I think 3, maybe 4 times, and felt like a complete failure because my mind would not keep still or quiet, and I'd look around the room and it looked like everybody else was like gone. That was near, my mind's just whirring and just going crazy. So I remember thinking, these people are really nice. I really respect them. They're all professional people. They weren't sort of kooky.
Yeah.
And which was really important for me at the time, because I felt like I wanted to connect with people that weren't too far out there, I guess is a way of putting it.
Yeah.
But anyway, I remember going for 3 or 4 times, and then one evening I just thought to myself, this is it, I'm done. I've tried it. It does not work for me. And I promised myself I wouldn't go back the next week. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I went home that night and had a lucid dream.
Oh, wow.
And where I left my body, and I've done that hundreds and hundreds of times in the past, but I left my body. I was in front of a yogi. He looked like a big Buddha, sitting with a loincloth. And, he was on a stage, actually, in the back of this hall.
I'm getting goosebumps just having you talk about it. I can feel the energy.
Yeah.
Oh.
Anyway, what happened was, as soon as I walked into the hall and laid eyes on this being, I recognized immediately that he was the one I'd been looking for my entire life. Mm. And I knew that he had merged with God. Mm. He was a reflection of God. And anyway, I lay down on the floor. I got this instruction to lay down on the floor, and then in the next minute, I felt a tap on the top of my head from this being who hadn't moved from the stage. Mm. And then I felt this incredible energy just pouring into my entire being.
Oh, wow.
And it's just like every cell was vibrating with this intense power. Mm-hmm. And I remember breathing in and out, and I was repeating a mantra. I was repeating Om Namah Shivaya. Mm. Which means, literally translated, means I bow to the light within me. Mm. And then I remember kind of floating off the floor for quite a while and feeling the energy getting so intense. It felt like I would explode into flame. And then the next thing, I fell down, and then it was like I fell through time and space, and then entered back inside my body and sat up in bed and took a breath, because I realized I hadn't been breathing. Mm-hmm. And I took a breath in and went, and it was so loud it woke my husband.
Wow.
And my husband said, what happened? What happened? He was worried. And I said, I don't know, but my life will never be the same again. Mm. And it was true. I didn't at all fully understand what that gift was about. I'd never read any yogic scriptures. I didn't know anything about initiation of any form, as I'd been raised a Catholic. But what happened then was I couldn't sleep. And the next day, through this flow of, sequences and synchronicities, I met a woman that had been in the dream. She'd been the one that had taken me into the hall. And I explained the dream to her, and then she said, "Oh my God, you've received Shaktipat Diksha."
Mm.
And so she invited me to her house later that day, and then she presented me with a book. And the book was titled Play of Consciousness.
Mm.
And when I opened the book, there was the photograph of the great being who I discovered was, his name was Bhagavan Nityananda.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a great avadut. He was a great master yogi who used to travel all over India and give initiation. At the time, he died in 1967, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
So that was way before, this happened to me. But from that point on, my entire life just changed dramatically.
Wow.
So all the intuitive abilities that I'd really tried to manage or suppress, ahead of that, because I tried to sort of close it down because I was worried about being seen as weird. So all of that it was like the lid was taken off and all of that just exploded. So weird things started happening in the house. The electricity, the light bulbs would go really bright and then they'd shatter.
Mm-hmm.
Fans would start spinning and they weren't plugged in. I'd have all these dreams and visitations from great beings, saints from different traditions and faiths that I'd never read about.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I met the Dalai Lama. I had a dream with the Dalai Lama.
Wow.
He came and gave instruction, and he was laughing the whole time.
Of course he was.
Of course. So this went on for years. And what I realized later on was that the gift of this initiation was, expanding everything and causing everything to develop and grow.
Mm-hmm.
And all the teachings and the visitations from the saints from different paths and traditions were to really lay the foundation for the work that they were calling me to do later on.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was one of those saints came in the dream and said to me, "When are you writing the book?"
Mm.
And I remember saying, writing about what?
Yeah.
What was the write about? And she looked at me as if to say, "Come on now."
Mm.
And then I realized, it was really about sharing this process of awakening.
Yeah.
And really trusting the process, trusting what we're feeling as being true for us in any given moment, and really living from that place. So anyway, I was given all these directives to write and start creating and working, creating courses and programs, and then offering really life purpose readings and self-empowerment readings, and really looking at the gifts that are inherent and often hidden inside the clients that I work with. So I work with people worldwide, really.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also teach intuitive painting programs and workshops, because that's really a great way to connect in with self and play, and also play. So, my journey essentially took me from the UK to Italy, back to Nassau. And then I went off to India for a while, lived in India, and then 2 places in the Ukraine.
Oh, wow.
New York, and then back again to Nassau.
Wow.
And everything's always been prompted by that inner directive, inner guidance, having dreams, being given messages, and literally following the call of the soul, and not really worrying about how it'll turn out, because I know it always turns out well.
Mm-hmm. That's the hard part, though.
Sure, trust is a big issue, but the thing is that I always tell people, well, trust the tiny parts of what feels right. Look at what the first step might be,
Mm-hmm.
Take that.
Yeah.
And then it kind of, I think it builds that reflex, that muscle in
Mm-hmm.
terms of just trusting the bigger call.
Yeah.
Which might be to quit a job because the job is no longer satisfying or fulfilling for you.
Mm-hmm.
Or ending a relationship because it's really not working. So, it's always, what I found is the universe always finds a way of presenting small opportunities before you're asked to take the bigger leap.
Mm-hmm.
And everything always has its own way of flowing.
Yeah.
As long as you're listening and paying attention.
Yeah. Yep.
So that kind of in a nutshell is my story.
It's a good story. You've been everywhere.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And as I said, as a kid, I never read anything about Shaktipat initiation. I wouldn't have had any clue. Mm-hmm. It wasn't even in my lexicon, it wasn't part of anything. And just the whole process has been really, really amazing. Really amazing. So, I never quite know what's coming next.
Yeah.
But I've just learned to go with the flow of what feels right.
Mm-hmm.
And trusting that and knowing that, if I need help, that will show up somehow.
Yeah. What would you say is your number one, motivator in your life or driver? What is it that keeps you?
It's really about where I started, which is about expressing the inexpressible. Mm. And, in the work that I do, what I realize is I create a safe space.
Yeah.
For teenagers, adults in intuitive painting workshops and with clients one-on-one. Mm-hmm. I create a safe space so that we can look at what the inexpressible is for them. Yeah. What is the self saying, the higher self saying and pointing to in one's life? Because when you actually start paying attention and looking, there's signs everywhere.
Yeah.
And the thing that I realized is that, as a kid, from the very earliest age, I was always trying to draw and paint or write. Mm-hmm. And find a way to express that I couldn't even put into words, but really express the inexpressible through the artwork and the writing and everything else. Mm-hmm. And trying to make sense of it all.
Yeah.
Because, I just knew, like you, and again, like the listeners, I knew there was more to life.
Yeah.
Than men.
Yeah.
And I just knew I wouldn't be happy, I wouldn't be content unless I discovered what that was. Mm-hmm. And also found someone or something that could really affirm that for me. And thankfully, this great being Nityananda appeared and really proved that what I was perceiving was the truth. Mm. So, and the beauty is that I work with people from every kind of faith and background. It doesn't matter whether, they're even non-believers in anything, mm-hmm. Or they might be Buddhists or Sufis or Catholics. It doesn't matter because essentially everybody is searching for what is true for them.
Yeah.
And trying to feel into what is true for them as well. Because it's one thing to read books from great masters and great teachers, but can you apply that in your own life? Mm-hmm. Can you find pointers or touchstones in your own life that reflect that truth? So much of what I do is really about holding a mirror up for people.
Yeah.
To be able to affirm and confirm what they already know to be true inside themselves, even if it's only half seen or half heard within them. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it's expressing the inexpressible.
There's a lot of people, I was going to say young people, but I'm sure it's for all, the message is for all ages. But what's your one piece of advice or message for other people to stay motivated in their own life?
I'd always say it always comes down to being true to you. Mm. Absolutely. And finding a way to live that truth, as challenging as that might be, because it does sometimes take courage. But, there's really no alternative, because the thing is, and I know this has kind of been well articulated before, but there's really no alternative, because if we try to live for other people, or if we try to, let's say, work in an area that really isn't fulfilling for us, we'll never be happy. So it's really about trusting, and I'm not meaning trusting the mind, because the mind will come up with all kinds of, ideas and fantasies about escaping. But I'm speaking to what is true inside your heart and what really feels like the right thing to do in any given moment. And if you have the courage to follow the call of your heart and the call of your soul and spirit, you'll never go wrong. It might be challenging.
Yeah.
It will certainly be challenging because we have to be honest with ourselves.
Yeah.
You have to be willing to take an honest inventory about what is working and what is not working in your life. Looking at that, obviously learning lessons from it and from those events and situations, but then being willing to make those changes.
Yeah.
And that just might mean doing a little self-inquiry around something and finding a way to make a job more acceptable for the time being, because obviously, if you're in a job that you hate, you can't just drop it, the minute, and then you've got to build a bridge.
Yeah.
And you start building the bridge by taking an honest self-inventory, looking at what isn't working and what you can kind of change or look at from a higher perspective.
Yeah.
And then look at new ways to build bridges to other opportunities. But really and truly, the first step is to do the inner work. You can't take the leap. If you take a leap before you've done the inner work, you'll just find that you've recreated the same situation. And I know we're all familiar with that, right?
Yes. What is that? There's a Stephen Covey quote about that, and I'm not going to get it totally right, I don't think, but it's about, if you keep climbing the ladder that's against the wrong wall, you're going to keep ending up in the same place. And he talks about you got to lean the ladder against a different wall to have a different outcome.
Sure. It's like, I think there's a story about going down the same road and falling into the same hole. It's just similar here, right?
Yep. Exactly.
So it's, it's really about being aware and awake to your own life.
Yeah.
And looking at everything that's happening and showing up.
Yeah.
Really being willing to look, and to learn from those things, rather than having a fantasy of going someplace else, or escaping or getting out of a marriage, or thinking, oh, maybe in 5 years when the kids have gone off to college, I'll be able to blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And that never comes. And what happens is, when we live in those fantasies, we're never happy with here and now. We miss our own lives.
Yeah.
Because we're either living in the fantasy of the future, or we're looking back at the past and thinking about how great it was back then, and we're not happy now.
Yeah.
It's really about being real and true.
Yeah.
And really owning that, and being willing to do the work that's required to be here and pay attention and start working on yourself.
Yeah. So how do people find you? I want you to talk a little bit about your book and your courses and your website, and just, how do people find you and how do they get support?
Sure. Well, my website is truealignment.org. And I have links there to, my courses and everything. My email address is truealignment@yahoo.com. And my book is called An Awakened Life, A Journey of Transformation. And that's available on Smashwords and also Barnes & Noble.
Okay.
And a a site called zinzinaswell.com. But if anybody listening is interested, they can send me an email or connect with me through the website, and I'll give them a free copy of the book, because that really gives them an idea about who I am and how I work.
Yeah.
If they're interested. And it has pretty much a lot of information there.
Yeah, it's chock full of all sorts of. I think with your book, even one page and one simple story from that book can open up so much for someone. So it's a really incredible gift that you wrote for everyone. So
yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, there's a lot in it.
Yeah.
It also did with the shadow,
Yeah.
how to work with the shadow, which is very important.
Mm-hmm.
Very important. So there's a lot there, and I've written all kinds of articles online. If you put my name into the search, and all the articles will come up. I've written for Tiny Buddha, Mind Body Green, All Things Healing, and a host of other sites as well. And the articles often have very simple and accessible self-inquiry exercises that anybody can do anywhere, anytime, which really supports, really being in alignment with one's truth, essentially.
Mm-hmm. And is there any last message you want to leave for everyone before we're done?
Yeah, again, it's coming back to having the courage to be you.
Mm-hmm.
Just be you. There's really no alternative.
Mm-hmm.
And the universe is waiting for each one of us to be true to who we are.
Yeah.
Rather than trying to concede or contract down. And just trying to live from that space, even if it means taking tiny steps initially.
Mm-hmm.
But there really is no alternative. And then you'll find that your entire life really supports that.
Mm-hmm.
And the blossoming into that.
Mm-hmm.
And, and then it's a win-win. Everybody wins.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here today. I so appreciate it. And you've definitely been an integral part of changing my life. And thank you to everybody who is listening today and watching us. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you, Lisa. This is great fun. Really, really enjoyed it.
And
as always, it's a joy.
Yes. We have a little one who's joined us.